All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Truthwire, where we're going to break down some of the latest news And we're going to look at it from a different perspective, as we always do, not from the perspective that's just popular. Because what I've been seeing happening with alternative media is they've become mainstream alternative media. And my explanation of that is going to require an entire other episode of why that is and why I feel that's what's happening. But if you're new here, please like and subscribe and share the video. If you're not new, if you're coming to us from our old days at the Convo couch, please make sure you have the bell because we are completely shadow banned everywhere. We're completely demonetized. So make sure you actually get to share and get to have the notifications that are sent out as well. So please do that and also follow us on Rumble. And I'm also today on Rumble for my audience under my Fiorella Isabel. So thank you all. Let's go ahead and bring in our co-host, Matt Weinglass. He is guest hosting for Pasta, who is on assignment. Thank you, Matt, for coming on. Very happy to see you here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again, Fee.
So, Matt, we're going to break some of these things down, and I'm going to want to hear your perspective first, actually, because you might obviously have a different point of view on things, and I'm kind of hearing different points of view on all sides. So, let's get to our first section, Jayme, which we're going to be talking about Trump supposedly abolishing the USAID, which he's not really doing that, but that's what the headlines say. And I'm asking the question, is this a victory or a new danger? As you all can guess, I don't think this is a victory. I think it's a new danger, but we're going to go over what exactly it means. So, The Guardian posted an article about this, which basically says that the Washington, D.C. headquarters of the USAID, the United States Agency for the International Development, was reportedly closed today, and workers were told to stay at home. And of course, this is something that a lot of people have taken to social media to say, oh my goodness, this is great. But long before the right was talking about the USAID being a CIA cutout, the left or the anti imperialist sectors, the more independent types, have long been talking about this, about the fact that the USAID was used as a mechanism to funnel funding for covert operations. We're talking about the Ukraine war. We're talking about the destabilization of many countries, especially in Latin America. We've seen Laura Richardson. We have seen, for example, Southcom as well. And all of these operations, including some NED, like the National Endowment for Democracy, all of these have been operating. And yes, the Democrats have usually operated this through a more foreign policy that is a more so covert, that is more so of a soft power type of policy, right? And so people are hailing this as a victory because now the Democrats don't get to push their agenda. And the article goes on to talk about how the staff received this late night emails on Sunday telling them not to come into work. And this was after 24 hours after the top security officials, two of them at USAID, the world's largest single donor of foreign aid, were suspended after they tried to stop Representative Elon Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, from gaining access to these restricted parts of the building. They reportedly did get access eventually. And the thing that worries me here right off the bat, Matt, is Elon Musk's access to this, because in spite of the fact that people have made Elon Musk to be some sort of hero and a free speech arbiter, he's actually not been that at all. So him gaining access to this is a bad thing. Now, if we look at the US aid actually being completely taken out, that would be a good thing. But my feeling is this is going to sort of re-push it, re-emerge it in different ways.
Yeah.
So I want to hear your thoughts first and foremost on this.
Yeah, I think, Fee, I think you're onto something here as far as anticipating this isn't so much of a victory. But however, I have to say, let's start with the fact that he got rid of that he got rid of this agency. It's gone. What you go to the website right now, it's gone. The Twitter account is gone,
Mhm.
and this is good. Now, look, what you're talking about, this right wing media becoming mainstream. I'm with you on that. I think that it's this like championing. It's stick it to the Democrats, Trump and Elon. They're just this bulldozing approach. They're championing it without any sort of critical thought that needs to go into it. So that's why I appreciate this conversation with you, because we got to look at, well, what's the next step? This reminds me of when Biden got all the cheers from mainstream at the time, when we got out of Afghanistan. Oh, yay, what a great dude. It's like, but the whole time it was all about taking that money and repositioning it into the Ukraine war, which that's what it was
Mhm.
for. And so it's just, you just restructure it into somewhere else. And we need accountability on where this money's going to go. So I would say the next question that needs to be asked is, where is this 72 billion going next? We need to be on that, and we need to anticipate that the right wing, independent media outlets are not going to be so concerned about that question. They just like championing this first step, which is the bulldozing approach of Trump and Elon. And I'm with you on the Elon thing too. We have to be really careful about what is it that he has all this access and power, and he's already demonstrated on his own platform on X that he's selective and picks and chooses what gets seen, what doesn't get seen, the shadow banning that we've all experienced. So these are the questions that not too many people are asking. So it's good that we're
Yeah.
doing it. At the same time, let's just say this agency needs to go. It is not an aid agency. It's not this idea. Even going through that Guardian article, I mean, they're talking about all the humanitarian aid and all this stuff that we're
For
no
sure.
longer going to be doing. It's like that's all theater. The real purpose of USAID was this CIA front. This was what it was,
Mhm.
to conduct foreign policy, pushing it across the globe, advancing U.S. national interest. This is the kind of stuff that we can't be doing anymore in this new world. So I champion that this happened, but we have to be skeptical about where this money goes next.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it shouldn't exist to begin with, because of the way it's been used, essentially as a front financing regime change. But for me, it's more of you talked about the question, right? That people aren't asking, where is this money going to go? I feel like we already have an answer, because essentially this is not going to go anywhere. It's just going to be reshifted into our foreign policy, because the Republicans tend to have more of an overt type of foreign policy. They literally say, we're going to take serious oil. We're going to whack Soleimani. This is how Donald Trump is. And so they do say the quiet part out loud very often, like Rubio has also stated it many times.
Mhm.
And I think that that's where this is going to go. But also, you mentioned Elon Musk. Elon Musk, I mean, he isn't to be trusted. He is trying to create Twitter into being this gigantic technocratic platform that basically encompasses everything. And I think we can't forget about that aspect with his participation in this as well. So when we talk about controlled demolition, this is what I'm talking about, a controlled demolition aspect of this, where you're going to see the coming together of big tech oligarchs. A lot of them were in attendance to Trump's inauguration. And that is no coincidence. That is no mistake. This is what a lot of people aren't paying attention to, save a few. And that's essentially, I think it's going to allow this to be looked on as a victory rather than what it actually is distracting us from. And so I want to highlight a couple people who pointed some things out. Obviously, you guys know what I'm saying. I do think that there's going to be also more overt interactions, like, for example, the tariff pushes, as well as the interventions in Latin America. But there's going to be a lot of, like, normalization, meaning there's going to be a lot of giving in from the other nations. And I forgot to put in the clip, Jayme. I don't know if you can find it at some point, but where Marco Rubio talked about multipolarity. This is something that people keep bringing up to me as if that's like, okay, yeah, Marco Rubio, he's accepting multipolarity. But I'll actually continue on that. I just want to highlight this next tweet from Just a Thought Galvi. She always has some interesting things to say. And she said US institutions are undergoing a controlled demolition. So the people will readily accept a technocratic surveillance state
Mm.
in their wake. And the next thing I want to include really quick so we can get your thoughts on these, because they're all kind of along the same lines. Keith McHenry said they are privatizing US aid and plan to continue to use it to topple governments using our taxes to fund their operations. One agency after another will be gifted to some techno fascist after another. It will be like the total information awareness TIA to Palantir transfer. And then the last one I want to highlight is Whitney Webb's, which let me pull it up here. I don't know why I don't have that one up. She said, for people saying Elon is trustworthy and US aid is bad, do you guys remember Elon's "we'll coup whoever we want, deal with it" statement over the 2019 coup in lithium rich Bolivia that he was poised to benefit from? Even if USAID is completely dismantled, that certainly does not mean that regime change ops will stop. Oligarchs can just fund them directly. Exactly. They largely control the controversial NGOs that USAID funded anyway. Sorry for raining on the parade. This is exactly how I feel. But handing over major government ops to intelligence military linked oligarchs is unlikely to be the win against the deep state you think it is. It is ultimately a deeper centralization of power, and historically that doesn't end well. Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, Whitney's been right about about many things, and you're right. This is a raining on the parade, but we understood Trump being allowed to start a second term, that he was handpicked this time, not necessarily handpicked the first time in 2016, but this time we know it's a negotiation. We know that he gets to do a couple little things, but there is an overall agenda of just repackaging stuff and continuing the empire as scheduled. So we knew that going in. So I would say let's applaud the fact that US aid is done. However, what is this privatization that's happening that Whitney's talking about, that you're talking about, Fee? This is that part we can't really say yet. I mean, I do we have a paper trail yet of the privatization, or are we just is it speculating? Because I haven't seen the exact, like, what agency has there been a new agency set up? I haven't seen that yet. I mean, do we know for a fact that this is in process and this is moving?
Well, it's moving in terms of the Department of Government Efficiency, right? That's the one Elon Musk is going to head. But again, it's more of like Marco Rubio is going to absorb where all of this was going. We don't know exactly, as you mentioned early on, that where this funding is going, how it's going to be repurposed, essentially. That's kind of my point, is like, a lot of people are hailing this as a victory and just celebrating without actually looking at all the other major things. And I forgot, I believe, to include one other tweet. I actually want to kind of break this one down. I think it was Jayme under the Keith McHenry tweet. He was quote tweeting somebody's tweet that went, I got a lot of play, and a lot of people, and this is what I feel like, a lot of people are looking for positivity, especially after so much negativity, right? But what
Yeah.
I've been seeing is obviously a lot of people have wishful thinking and a sort of hopium on things, when the reality of what is actually going on with this administration is we have a Zionist administration, super committed to continuing Greater Israel, super committed to an oligarchy of billionaire technocrats, super tied to these billionaire technocrats, and completely tied to this PayPal mafia with Elon Musk and all of these people, that is advocating to censor a certain segment, just like the Democrats were doing. And what we're looking at is the potential for a ceasefire in Ukraine at the cost of XYZ. So that's what I'm looking at. So Arno Bertrand put out this long tweet basically saying that we're looking at the seismic shift in US relationships with the world, that the US is dismantling its foreign interference apparatus, and that when Rubio said that we're now in a multipolar world, that's the video I wanted to find, with great powers in different parts of the planet, and that the post-war global order is not just obsolete, it is now a weapon being used against us. And the tariffs. First, well, we'll talk about the tariffs in a minute, but he's saying that this is a US effectively saying our attempt at running the world is over, to each his own. We're now just another great power, not the indispensable nation. And he said hegemony was going to end sooner or later. And now the US is basically choosing to end it on its own terms. It is the post American world order brought to you by America itself. And to me, I fully disagree with this analysis. I actually think the opposite. I think that the US is going to, it is an empire in decline, right? We are seeing the decline. You're witnessing it. Everybody is seeing it. However, in its decline, it still has so many cards up its sleeves. It's still going to exert the most hurt that it can possibly exert. It understands what's happening with BRICS. It understands what's happening with multipolarity. That doesn't mean that we're going to change necessarily the desired outcome. We might simply shift tactics. In shifting tactics, we're talking about the appearance of an ending of the hegemony, when in actuality, the hegemony is going to expand and focus on different sectors, as I stated early on, in Latin America, in Iran, and China. And we're seeing that be played out in real time with these tariffs and with the Panama Canal that we'll talk about in a second. So, just any last thoughts on the subject, Matt, you want to highlight?
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned Mark Rubio. He's saying this out loud. He's saying that we understand that the world is changing. He's saying 5 years from now, we're not going to be able to we're not going to be able to do all the horrible stuff you're doing. We're going to do it in a different way, but we can't do it the same way we're doing it. So he's saying that we're recognizing that the fall of this empire, we've seen it coming, and that's how empires go out. We go out kicking and screaming and doubling down however we can. And then presenting to the public like you bring Trump in. It's actually perfectly designed by the deep state. I mean, they said, let's bring Trump back in, and he can pretend that he's bulldozing through all these different agencies, but yet it's just repositioning, restructuring for one last push before the empire has fallen completely. So yeah, I think we're in agreement here. I wish there were more outlets like Truthwire, more outlets talking about this and being more skeptical, because we don't have to represent Team Blue or Team Red. We can say, hey, what is this entire empire about, and how has it been restructured to kind of convince half the country that this guy came in and he's like championing the people and taking on the deep state when the deep state hand selected him themselves. So we have to be more skeptical and have more conversations like this on all of the platforms we have before they take them down, before Elon shadow bans all of us for good.
Yeah, and you know how negativity is being punished on X, and so like, I'm being called negative or black pill, just like Whitney is, and others who are like, taking these positions of saying, wait a minute, hold up, like, look at what they're not telling you to look at over here. And I think that is our job as independent, non-mainstream media. But I do feel like recently I have seen the opposite coming from alternative media, just sort of like the bandwagon, oh, Trump, look at what Trump's doing. This is great. That's fine. You can say this is great, but you also need to say, but what are they not showing you? And that is essentially, it's not being contrarian. It is really looking at the whole picture in general. So I want to highlight another thing that I think signifies and kind of actually solidifies what we're talking about here, because the Panama Canal has been an issue for the United States. They've wanted control of it because they have seen China's expansion, China's potential talks also with Nicaragua, which aren't talked about often, about a canal there. But in essence, what just happened shows you that the United States still holds power in what they call its backyard in Latin America. And this like proves it entirely. So Panama's president Jose Raul Mulino said that the country will not renew a trade and development agreement with China. This was part of the Silk Road initiative, right? This is part of the
Yeah.
Silk Road project that China has been pushing. That is supposedly it's just an exchange between um, having China do business with many of these Latin American counterparts, but also have the benefit itself. This is the kind of foreign policy that the US could be having, where it's an equitable type of thing. And there's obviously give and take, but it's not forced and it's not coerced and it's not sanctions. It's that kind of just foreign policy that is a little bit different or substantially different. And this is after Donald Trump accused the Chinese of trying to control the Panama Canal, which the Chinese have been trying to get in there because the United States has long been in there, even if they haven't had full access to the Panama Canal. So Molino, the president, announced that he's not going to renew this participation with China's Belt and Road Initiative once this agreement expires, after a meeting with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And Marco Rubio is going to engage on this tour of Latin America. And he sent Grunel to Venezuela, which we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah.
And so, why this matters, Newsweek says Trump has suggested the U.S. should demand return of the Panama Canal if Panama does not reduce the fees it charges American ships. He's frequently accused China of trying to control the global trade routes. And the announcement basically suggests that the country may be hoping to appease Trump in his threats of retaliation unless it reduces Chinese influence. So obviously, this is going to affect China, right? This is an economic sort of attack against China because Trump has understood that it's not just a military type of attack they're going to have to wage against China, but it's an economic one. But I mean, China is an economic superpower, so the retaliation they have against them is actually I don't think it's going to be enough. But this is what they're trying to do. It's going to limit the trade, the investment, the cooperation, etc. So, Matt, just your thoughts on all of that right now.
I mean, Rubio got a nice little jab in, and scored another point for Team Trump, and said, "Look, we went in there, we got the deal done. There you go. China got a little jab. Okay, great. But China is not the overall battle, like you said, economically. China's not going to lose this battle overall. And you talk about Latin American countries. You talk about I think he even mentioned in his appearance earlier on Fox. Rubio is talking about Brazil and how China and Brazil they're going to bypass the petrodollar now. So like there's all these different ways that we're not going to be able to win this battle with China. So just because he got a little jab in and won this little got Panama to cave, great. But that's not that's just one little jab. It's not going to be the whole deal with China's going to. We're not going to be able to challenge China economically. He's telling us this. Rubio's telling us this. We got a little win today, but overall, they're done with the petrodollar. That's what's happening, and we're not going to be able to, push our American might anymore around the globe. So there are other ways they're going to have to come up with doing this. But yeah, I guess score one for Team Trump. I guess.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things to point out about this is the hold that the United States has on Latin American countries that are so fearful of being cooed or being interfered with or intervened in, especially in Central America and South America. Countries like Panama have long been influenced by the United States. This was just the beginning of them potentially having a relationship with China, which is completely now not happening. And I think that is a victory for the Trump administration. It is a short victory, but it does show that the United States isn't going to go down just slowly, right? They're going to go down, as you said, kicking and screaming. And yeah, they see where things are going, but they're trying to find different ways to appear and to make it look like they are actually succeeding in spite of the fact that China as a superpower now is allowing others to trade with it. We're going to see other attacks against China. We're going to see more attempts to isolate China from Russia. We're going to see more attempts to isolate China in general. And that shows that the foreign policy that we're talking about, an interventionist foreign policy, is just going to be more covert. It's just going to be more, more overt. It's going to be more obvious and very much a bullying type of policy. We actually do have that video. It's like 20 seconds long, Jayme, where we can show what Rubio says about the sanctions. And he basically says, he talks about Brazil and stuff. So let's go ahead and listen to that.
Today, Brazil, in our hemisphere, largest country in the Western Hemisphere south of us, cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar. They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them. Today, Brazil.
So I want to hear more, anything else you have to add to this, but I'm just going to say right now, one of the reasons why I think this is important is because Rubio is lamenting the ability to sanction countries and the ability that the United States is losing to another world power, and he knows it, but they're not accepting defeat. And I want to highlight here, they're not accepting defeat. They're simply saying, look, if we don't do something against China, then they're going to take over. And I think this signifies more than acceptance. I think it signifies them telling us where they're looking to foreign policy wise. And like I said, I think China is going to be a huge culprit besides the Middle East that we're seeing, besides Iran, besides the expansion of Greater Israel and the interventions and normalization going on also with Latin America. We're going to see China be the focus of Republicans, and it has been, of course, long, but because of the communist government, right? And this has been the whole thing. China is influencing our children. China is hacking us. China is doing all of this. So that's not surprising whatsoever, but look for China to be the target of the next phase of this foreign policy that we're moving into. And it's going to require us to actually go beyond just like, okay, well, is this simple? 1 + 1 = 2. I think the equations are going to be a lot more difficult for us to flesh out.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be a lot more challenging, and especially when we talk about the perception of China from American citizens themselves and how that's even changing. That's important. The part that
Yep.
it's very important that's happening at the same time is that you have this, that like you were saying about the Republicans have always had this, like we have to make China into this bad guy. They're coming for us. They're coming for us on TikTok. This whole thing that went down with Red Note had come up, and all these like Gen Zs are going on Red Note and interacting with Chinese citizens and exchanging stories and figuring out there's another point of view out there that we've been kept from. And now, so you have that in the background of all this. This is going to be a very difficult narrative to continue through the next 4 years here of Trump's administration here. They're going to have a hard time with this. I actually think Rubio is aware of this, and that's why he has to kind of say, look, we know this is happening, but we're going to find another way. We can still be America first, even though we're not. We're Israel first. But this is the thing he's going to have to deal with, because public perception is everything, and that is changing. We are watching that happen in real time. Democrats, Republicans aside, we have a younger generation that is engaging with Chinese citizens and having these interactions like we've never seen in the history of the planet, really, having this type of communication. So that's going to also play a role in how the perception unwinds over the next 4 years, and as we try to take on China and try to find different ways to hold on to American might, American power. It's going to be interesting to see all the maneuvers they do.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to make a prediction of attempts to isolate Russia from China. And the United States has tried that before, but this time around, I think after the potential 2025 deal that we're going to see between Russia, Ukraine, or NATO, Ukraine, and Russia, I think that there is potential for that to occur. Hopefully, Russia will resist it and see it, as yet another Western attempt to defang the non-aligned access, the East and the global South. But I do think that that is definitely going to be on the agenda. The policies aren't anymore as to directly attacking and pushing for regime change, even though we're still seeing that, right? We saw that with Syria. We saw all of this coming together, but also using friends and allies against the non-aligned access. And so I do see that, unfortunately, being a potential attempts. And let's not kid ourselves, we have very vulnerable positions still. Russia has effectively won this war in Ukraine. However, depending on what happens with these negotiations, there's always a potential for different theaters to emerge. We're seeing the pressure there in different areas of Eurasia, Moldova. We saw the attempts at Belarus. We've seen the attempts in Serbia, for example. There's all of this happening in the background. And that is not going to go away. These attempts aren't going to go away. There's just being repurposed into different points, and I think we need to watch out for that. So
Yeah, 100%.
So the other thing going on with Latin America is Trump backing off a little bit for 1 month on the Mexican tariffs. He had threatened Mexico with these huge tariffs, right? And the Republican Party has also been trying to wage some talks with Venezuela. This is quite dangerous because we know it was under the Trump administration that there were attempts to overthrow Venezuela's President Maduro and install Juan Guaido. So this is an article from Sky News, and it talks about Donald Trump agreeing to pass a 25% tariffs on goods from Mexico. This was hours before they were going to take into effect. The Canadian tariffs, they're still talking about it, and the Chinese tariffs, they're still also set for Tuesday. And so Sky News did a whole thing on it, but Mexico is reportedly to send 10,000 soldiers to the US border in this tariff pause deal. And Donald Trump has been trying to, again, have this type of policy where he's like, all right, well, if you don't do what we say, then we're going to put these tariffs on you. And I wanted to actually show this video I had on tariffs, but I forgot to put it in there. So I can put it in there in a second. But there's also the EU tariffs that Trump has been threatening with, which, again, we do have to look at the fact that the United States, per Victoria Nuland's admission, right, the EU, has no problem screwing the EU in every way, shape, or form, not just with the Ukraine war, but also just threatening them, even though they're supposed to be allies with these tariffs. So just right off the bat, your thoughts on these tariffs, and then also Trump sort of saying, okay, wait a minute, we'll give you a month. What do you think will happen after?
We're going to take a look at this because this and he did tweet this out on Truth Social that he was very, very pleased with the interaction with Mexico president, and that they come to this arrangement. It seems to me that over the next month we're going to see some cooperation at the border, as far as you mentioned the 10,000 soldiers being there to help with the border situation. And I think that if that goes well, we might not be doing the tariffs at all. He might keep the relationship. I don't know. If everything falls apart in the next 30 days, then he's going to do it. But I think he might be this approach with Mexico. It's interesting. Mm-hmm. I think he's at least on Truth Social. Trump is representing that we have this very strong relationship right now, and she's not
Mhm.
denying it. I don't know. I got to look closely at this, but I did not see. I have to say this, Fiorella. I did not see this coming. I thought this was going through. This was definitely gonna, and this was in the, like you said, the last few hours. This thing got stopped. The tariffs will probably be going on tomorrow. I guess Tuesday will be Canada and the EU. But for
Mhm.
some reason, we have this special relationship. Something's going on there. The special relationship with those two. So we'll have to take a look in the next 30 days. But I don't know. We could. It might not happen. It might not happen.
I think that the United States does have a special relationship with Mexico because of our closeness, but also because of the economic relationship that is vast. I mean, we're talking about labor forces that are also there. I'm sure you know people sometimes live in Tijuana and then they go work in the United States and they have special permissions and passes. You have the importing of Mexican goods. I mean, tequila, like very, very things that we use, hot sauces, all these things. Apart from the immigration chaos that ensued, you have a very intricately tied economy. You also have the whole issue of the drug trafficking, which we all know who started that and why. But it's something that I think is different, for example, than a relationship with the rest of Latin America, because Mexico is a part of North America, but it's also a part of Latin America. Um, you have that proximity as well as economics intertwined, and then added to the fact that Scheinbaum is continuing many of the policies that AMLO had, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, that he had. They this is a progressive government, but it's not a government that is going to be extremely, radical. It's going to walk a fine line between doing what is best for the country, but also not trying to push the US too much. So you're not going to have like the same type of attitude that, say, Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua is going to have, where he says, Yankee, go home, don't bother us. We want nothing to do with you. You're going to have an attitude of trying to be more diplomatic, but she has been very firm on her stance of saying, look, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do it this way, we're not gonna be threatened, we're very proud of what we've done, we're gonna continue providing for the Mexican people. And the Mexican National Guard is also being sent. So it's not just like US troops, but it's also Mexican troops. So there's more of an equitable type of relationship there. So yeah, I think this is interesting. I think the issue about fentanyl is also going to have a play here because Trump has been talking about fentanyl, right? And the fentanyl epidemic and all of this. However, there's a lot to say about Claudia too. Many people fearing that she may give in too much because of her background. So we really don't know at this point, but it does seem like I think the cost for the US to have a very negative relationship with Mexico would be quite difficult. And there's really no one that they have to replace her with either. So I think that's also a part of it. Did you have a tweet about that, by the way, or of what Trump said?
Yeah, let's
Oh,
look at
that's
that.
later.
No, that's there. We can look at that. That's when
Okay,
he's
yeah.
talking about this great conversation they had. Jayme should be on that.
It's the last one, Jayme. So
Yeah.
yeah, we can show it now.
Yeah, well, JD Vance put it out, but this is Trump's actual tweet. He says,
Mm.
I just spoke with President Claudia Sheinbaum and of Mexico. It was very friendly conversation where she agreed to immediately supply 10,000 Mexican soldiers on the border. All right, here we go. This is easier to see. On the border separating Mexico and the United States. These soldiers will be specifically designated to stop the flow of fentanyl and illegal migrants into our country. We further agree to immediately pause the tariffs, anticipated tariffs, for a 1-month period during which we will have negotiations headed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent, and Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick. and the high-level representatives of Mexico. I look forward to participating in those negotiations with President Sheinbaum as we attempt to achieve a deal between our two countries. Hard to argue with that as far as having this discussion. It sounds to me like this is a conversation that needed to happen. They're working together with the fentanyl problem, like you mentioned. Now, are we going to really get to the bottom of that and really understand the roots of the cartel problem, the roots of the CIA? We can talk about that issue. He never talks about that, but this is us working together. And that's why we're going to have this 30-day clock and see how it goes. But I don't know. Am I missing something here? If President Biden had done something like this, do you think the left would be celebrating right now? Probably. They probably would be like, hey, that's what a great guy. He's so great. Having these discussions. What a diplomacy, right? Well, to me, this sounds like diplomacy from Trump. I don't know, unless I'm missing something here.
Yeah, actually, I don't know. I mean, it is on its face, it's diplomatic, and it's definitely one of the only things that I've seen that's actually pretty clear thus far from Trump. So I actually will say I agree with you, and I think this is actually seemingly diplomatic. I do also think that the US has other things up their sleeves right now that Mexico isn't going to be, I think, the focus. I think what we're going to see is focusing more on South America. And I think that this is more of just like, okay, well, we put out these tariffs and now we're getting this concession of her allowing us to have these troops, because having troops on the border is a serious thing. We're talking about foreign military, right? So that is actually, I think, one of the reasons why he is doing this. But I agree, like it's actual more diplomacy than I think we've gotten with the Biden administration. And I also think that Sheinbaum has a way of just of standing strong. She's like a strong leader from her delivery, from what I've seen. So she's not taking any shit, right? Like she's also standing strong. And I think there's a certain level of respect with that. Weirdly enough, with Trump, I don't see him I do see him respecting people who kind of aren't weak, or that he views as not as weak. And I think that's also a huge part of it. But this is only for a month, although Sheinbaum has stated that, she wants it to be indefinite, and that she's hoping that they're going to make this an indefinite thing. Similar to what happened with Colombia, where Petro initially was like no, but then they worked something out. But the response from Petro was enough for people to say, "Look at how great he's responding," even though Petro is pretty milquetoast. And the thing is, there has to be some sort of, from Latin America, some sort of pushback. There can't just be a total given. But I don't think Mexico is necessarily a target here. And I think the border crisis is something that they're also dealing with, because there are people coming into Mexico also. So
yeah, for sure.
I want to talk about Venezuela for a moment, if you can bring that one up, Jayme. 1 second. So I'm pretty sure you've heard what happened, Matt. So there was a meeting between Nicolas Maduro and Richard Grenell at the presidential palace in Miraflores in Caracas, Venezuela, and they had an agreement. And this agreement basically agreed to have Venezuela take these people who were imprisoned and have them be deported outside of the country. So this is what happened. Donald Trump's crisis negotiator returned from Venezuela with 6 freed American prisoners. These American prisoners, after securing a commitment from the Latin American country's authoritarian leader, they say, Nicolas Maduro, to accept the deported migrants. So Richard Grenell, the U.S. president's envoy for special missions, traveled to Venezuela to press Maduro to accept thousands of Venezuelan deportees, according to U.S. officials, and secure the release of U.S. nationals taken prisoner by Caracas. So essentially, there was this trade where the U.S. nationals who were deemed to be doing covert activities were taken prisoner by Maduro were exchanged for the Venezuelan deportees, and Venezuela is now accepting these people back into the country that initially were trying to get to the United States or were in the United States. And Trump posted this on his Truth social media. He said, "It is so good to have the Venezuela hostages back home, and very important to note that Venezuela has agreed to receive back into their country all Venezuela illegal aliens who were encamped in the U.S." The Venezuelan government said in a statement that the talks were respectful and touched on migration, sanctions, and detain U.S. citizens, and that a fresh start was needed in relations between Washington and Caracas. And this comes, of course, as Marco Rubio, as I said, is going to Latin America on his trip to talk about, renewed U.S. interests. And Grenell is very close to Trump, apparently. And Maduro had signaled willingness to talk. And this, I'm going to say a couple things about this in a second. Russia did send a government plane to Caracas that landed 15 minutes before Grenell's arrival on Friday. Maduro, a close ally of Russia and Iran, has been shunned by the West and much of Latin America after claiming victory in the presidential elections. Okay, so Matt, first of all, I want to get your take on this and why you think, what do you think this means? Because from where I'm looking at, it does signal a U.S. Another U.S. hold and victory on Venezuela, against Venezuela, actually, in my opinion. But I want to hear your take on it first.
I mean, you can only imagine what was the deal that was made. It sounds like that Maduro caved to everything that we wanted, that the special envoy wanted, and the part that's probably not being said in this article is there must this whole reset. So Maduro's talking about we need a fresh start. Well, we need a fresh start where we're not going to be planning another coup and funding a overthrow of Maduro or assassination of him, which we've done several times. And his predecessor, we had with Chavez, we've been doing this to them for years, and then not acknowledging them as a real elected president. Maybe those were the discussions. Hey, we'll start acknowledging you. We'll stop planning coups against you. That might have been the arrangement. Let's reset. Come on, put it there, man. We got this. From here on out, we're cool. You got to do all this stuff for us, though. Okay, so you got to give us back these prisoners. You got to take in the people we're about to deport. So you got to do all these things for us. But we promise, we super duper secret promise, we'll not coup you again. We won't. Okay, cool. Okay, that's probably what's not being said.
Yeah, well, also what's not being said, Matt, is that the U.S. still fails to recognize Maduro as a legitimate president. So I think that's a huge thing to point out, in spite of the fact that, okay, Venezuela is being diplomatic and doing this. The U.S. has rejected the fact that Maduro is president. They've been completely still adamant about that. In fact, the secretary of press secretary of the White House said that when she was asked, about this meeting. And she said, no, absolutely not. The U.S. does not recognize Nicolas Maduro as president. So somebody is downplaying something, right? Either the U.S. is downplaying or upplaying this as a major victory, or Venezuela is doing it. So what I think is happening, because of the information I have about what's going on in sources in Venezuela, there are people in the government that are ready to find a solution with the United States and actually have open relationships with the United States, that want no more sanctions, that want Venezuela's to continue to participate in the global economy in the same way again, at the cost of having an open relationship with the U.S. And that there are people in government who want that. And this is why we're seeing these negotiations take place. One of the reasons for that is because of the fall of Syria. And I don't think most have heard this before, but the fall of Syria pretty much exposed a weakness in the allyship of countries, for example, Iran and Russia. And that some people feel like there isn't enough of a backing by Russia and Iran, or there's a weakness to that, to where they are afraid of another attempted coup, as we saw up until the very last minute, the attempted coup of during Maduro's inauguration right before. And so there is this sentiment by some that there needs to be some sort of negotiation with the United States, or they are next on the chopping block. And from what we've seen from Marco Rubio's stance against communist dictatorship Venezuela, and how he's like one of the most anti-communist, anti-socialist, anti-whatever in Washington D.C., but also specifically under the Trump administration, we've seen the attacks on Venezuela. It makes sense that Venezuela is doing this. I don't agree with it. I think if you give the United States a hand, they will take the entire arm and eventually the entire person. So I think Venezuela has to be very, very careful about what they're doing. I'm obviously not here to tell a country how to run its affairs, but from an analyst perspective, I think they need to be very, very careful with what they're doing, because I agree with you. It does seem like a concession and they got very little out of it. I have to say that people are coming back. A lot of people that had left their countries are starting to come back to Venezuela. So that's something that's also not talked about. The fact that even before this, people were voluntarily coming back. So I think that's also like escalated to make Trump look like some sort of a winner. But I do see this as a Trump point, if we want to take points. So
yeah, score another one for Team Trump, I guess. But like the historical perspective, which we always miss, is that we're the main reason. American imperialism is the main reason that the Venezuelans were driven out in the first place. I mean, we knew back like 10 years ago there was like 4 million just leaving because we had just clamped down on sanctions and all this stuff, just driving that economy into crap. So then we can announce to the world, look what happens when you have a communist leader and a socialist leader. They fail. They fail because we make them fail. And I always ask this question to all my right-wing populist friends. I say, hey, listen, if capitalism's so great, and communism's so horrible, if it's so horrible, why do we just let it fail on its own? Why do we always have to push it to fail? And so that's the historical context with Venezuela that created the refugees. We never talk about this on the border. We never talk about how are we going to go about solving this? And a big curtain back moment where we understand that both parties are in on this together. They both push American imperialism equally. We go back to Trump's very first State of the Union from 2016. Or 2017. I think it was January 2017. You go right back to that. I think that was the famous Nancy Pelosi ripping up the speech moment, and that was the one they drove through all the different mainstream networks. But there's the part they don't show you is the moment that everybody in the room stands up and applauds, is when you recognize the not the actual president Maduro, you recognize his competitor. Both sides just applaud, and you're like, well, how can that be happening at the same time? Trump's the worst thing we've ever had, but everybody gets up at the same time and cheers. The same way we see with Netanyahu. It's exactly the same. We cheer American imperialism. We cheer our thumbprint on every part of the global conquests that we do. It's an oligarchy. It's a one party system. We have to remember that as we get as we flush through these daily news stories about how we're behaving in these other countries. It's something that American imperialism again is pushed by both sides equally. So if something got accomplished in Venezuela, it might have been, the thing that's not being said is we might have taken a step back from this type of coup operation that we've been trying to do there for decades.
Yeah, I think with Venezuela, they realize that they have that it's just going to be very difficult. I do think that has been established because they've tried so many times, right? Not just under Maduro, but under Chavez, and exactly as you said, like now they're like, okay, well, we're going to try something else. But the problem with this soft power approach, not for the United States, but for Venezuela, is that it is enticing and that it sounds good on paper, but really it's a very dangerous line to tread on. And I do worry for the future of Venezuela because of so much propaganda that you get from the United States, from Florida especially, and the people that are pro regime change Venezuelans that are living in the US and haven't even been to Venezuela for decades, and they're weaponized again to make this happen. So I don't see this as a good thing for Venezuela at all whatsoever. I think some people do. I think some people see normalization as a good thing, that okay, well, Venezuela will come back into the economic forefront. It will be once again a global leader. I think that's going to come at a price, and I think we're going to see that play out if it indeed does happen. If there are enough tentacles for the U.S. to go in there, because let's face it, as I've said, that we're going to shift from Eurasia a little bit, and they're going to make Europe deal with it. The U.S. is, and they're going to focus on Latin America and China, especially as other than the Middle East, which is also happening. So I wanted to show also. I put in one last video there, Jayme, about the tariffs, because I think it's important for people to understand. I want to ask you what you think about this tariff situation, Matt. The tariffs that would be placed on people if they continue, and how that's going to affect the average American. There was this interesting video on TikTok that went viral that was basically explaining from an economic businessman perspective what happens with the tariffs, how they work, and who absorbs the cost of the tariffs. So if you can play that, Jayme, if you can pull it up, let's listen to that and we'll hear our thoughts.
The tariffs.
The Chinese government pays a tariff.
No, they don't.
Yes, they do.
I'm an importer and exporter for 20 years. When a product comes into the US, there's something called a tariff sheet.
Okay.
I, as the buyer of that product, follow US law and pay the tariff. I'm an American citizen, I'm an American taxpayer. I pay that tariff to the US government, and that increase in the cost I then sell to you for a higher price because I've got to cover that tariff.
Then what about,
There is
then
no-
what do you say our tariffs are higher when they go overseas as opposed to theirs
Okay.
coming here?
Tariffs are never a zero-sum game. Tariffs are a tool. For example,
Okay.
you might say, you want to sell us your beans.
Yeah.
We are going to give you a low tariff if you buy our corn. But the cost of the tariff is ultimately always borne by the consumer.
Don't you think at the end of the day there may be more competition within the market of the U.S. government?
And you're confusing the question. This is not a question of competition. The point we're discussing is who bears the cost of the tariff.
Okay.
I couldn't tell you if it's good policy for the US government to tax beans and for the Chinese government to tariff corn. But what I can absolutely assure you is that a product that comes into the US is paid for by a US company, and the increased cost of that is borne by all of us. I am an importer and exporter. I do it for a living.
Okay. Then what's the alternative if at one point in our country's history was tariffs
Okay.
paid for our economy?
Tariffs don't pay for your economy.
But they did. We didn't have income taxes before.
That was before we had municipal infrastructure.
Correct. My understanding is that the tariff is lopsided to benefit other countries as opposed to ours. The suggestion is just to bring it up to make it equal.
That's why you have free trade agreements, right?
Right.
But it doesn't mean that even within the free trade agreement, there are not tariffs. If there's one thing you should take away from this extended conversation is you are always paying the tariff.
You know what? I'm not educated in that. Fair enough.
Yes,
It was a
that's
pleasure.
good.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
First of all, it was interesting that was a discussion where people didn't like curse each other out. So props for that, actually, to be able to have that discussion, because things are tense right now, right? So
Oh, yeah.
what do you make of that discussion?
No, for that I agree with that. That these are the conversations. That's why that blew up, was because the MAGA guy is listening to the tariff guy, the guy that does this for a living, and is like, oh, I didn't know that. That's great. I'm glad people are seeing this video. The point is the tariffs were always about crushing the worker, always. And it goes on both sides of it. We've been pulling this for years and years and years. How do you crush a worker when you put tariffs on with other countries? The idea is that you're supposed to try and get them to revolt, right, on their side. What he was explaining was that it also crushes on our side. So both sides feel the pain. And most of the time, it doesn't even work when you're talking about, like, we saw what we did with Russia. We're like, oh, we're gonna tariff the crap out of Putin and we're gonna destroy their economy. No, didn't really work. But I like the fact that He says, no, the American worker, the American small business owner, the American person, he's suffering from the tariffs that we're putting on the other countries. So the whole thing, yeah, I'm glad that's kind of that whole thing is being exposed here, and people are listening. They're waking up. They're saying this is not necessarily a good thing at all.
Yeah, and the thing is, tariffs hurt small businesses especially the most and benefit the corporate structures. So if
Yeah.
Trump does continue with these tariffs, what that's going to do is actually going to drive away mom and pop businesses, small businesses, because they have less of a financial ability to be able to maintain that cost of the tariff. Whereas a corporation like Amazon or any of these other corporate structures, they can absorb that cost better. And even if they put it on the consumer, Amazon has become such a necessity to so many people because they've cornered the market on everything like that. There's nothing that competes with it. So what I think we're seeing under this administration is an expansion of the predator class in a different way that when we saw with the Trump administration, but it's being painted as, oh, this is going to help, offset the cost a little bit. And I have to say, the United States has an awesome deal with a lot of things that are expensive in other countries. For example, in Russia, cars cost 3 to 6 times more than they do in the US. Even before the war, it was more expensive, but now it's absolutely insane. Yes, sanctions haven't killed Russia's economy in general because it's been able to pivot to other parts and other allies, China, India, etc. But in terms of the normal person and people who live here and who have to buy, say, a car, a Toyota RAV4 that costs like less than $30,000 in the US. Here it starts at 60K minimum. And a lot of things, not just cars, but TVs and all of these sorts of electronic things. We Russians pay more for it, and most of the time, at least double for these things. And I've compared the cost. I have seen it, and we actually, as Americans, have a much better deal for so many things that on a day to day we don't realize, just like, because we import everything, but it doesn't matter because everybody wants to wants to export to the US. We're so even something as eBay, it's just everything is just cheaper for us and for the Western world more so. But when you live in a country that is either less of a dominant country or is undergoing sanctions, things become extremely difficult on the day to day. And as somebody that's a foreigner in a country like Russia, I also feel that because I'm in a way absorbing what everybody else is absorbing, even if it doesn't destroy the economy as a whole. It really just becomes tedious for a number of reasons to have products, and for example, iPhones here cost double, and people here sometimes pay it because they want access to some of these things they can't have. However, there's also a strong pivot to China and the cars China is offering at a fraction of the cost of these imports from Japan or from the US that we get for cheap in the US. Chinese cars are seen here now more and more often, and that is a result of US sanctions and US policy. And these cars are actually they look really nice and they look very futuristic and they seem to work great. And I find that that's all very interesting because we don't make anything, as we were discussing before the show. We really just make guns, war. We have oil. I mean, it's just we don't really have an economy to anything to export other than that. So when people talk about jobs getting stolen, well, what jobs? Because we don't have those jobs that are
Yeah.
good paying union wages for people to steal. We have slave labor, essentially. So yeah, I think the tariff scenario, I think that's being poised as something that is helping Americans when it's actually the opposite. That's another thing that I'm I'm seeing, and it's funny because Trump, when he ran, he initially in 2016, a lot of the things he's pushing now, he was entirely against. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. He's in line with the deep state. He's not really taking it on. I hate when people think he's taking it on. He's doing the bidding of the thing that he ran on. But you're right. His policies have changed. Things that he used to be for that he's against now, and he's just kind of doing this little readjustment to kind of go with the final years of the empire as we're as we're falling, going out kicking and screaming, like we said earlier. Fee, we're going out kicking and screaming. So, however, yeah, push the tariffs, go for it. See how when people figure out and share videos like this, like you showed earlier, people are going to get a little bit more like, wait a minute, how is this good for us? How is this really good for us? Small businesses gone, Amazon takes over everything. I mean, everything. Amazon, eBay. It's insane. We'll see. We'll see how many MAGAs are going to continue cheering this on. When we see the results at home, we see more small businesses falling apart. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But I appreciate these conversations and people not blowing up at each other. That's you pointed that out earlier. I like that. We're listening. That's great.
yeah. I just want to say in closing, like, there are so many things that I see, not just the right, but people who are just looking for something positive that they
Mm,
would call out the Democrats on, but because Trump is here and it's not Biden, like that, they're not talking about it. They're sort of staying silent, right? They're not saying and questioning and talking about all these things, whether it's for a desire for this false sense of calm and positivity because Biden was so bad, and he was. But for me, it's like understanding that these presidents are selected to undergo and a certain level of to present a certain foreign policy, to present certain things, just like our Congress, essentially. And they don't have a full control. When you
mhm.
can't have, you can't say that the deep state is here and so powerful and blah, 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 and then magically pretend it doesn't exist once Donald Trump comes in, and magically pretend that, for example, the ceasefire deal just came out of nowhere because Trump came in. A lot of these things have been down the pipeline, have been talked about before Donald Trump came in. They have been set in place, and it's
Right.
he who is just going to execute them. And I think people forget that sometimes because Joe Biden was such a terrible president, and nobody's denying that. Nobody's trying to, say, "Hey, we want Joe Biden back." Nobody wants Joe Biden back, but um, it's kind of like understanding how U.S. politics works, and that's why I always say to everybody who watches the show, I'm not a reformist. I don't believe that the United States can reform the corruption that exists right now in the DC Beltway. I don't think I feel like we give out a lot of band-aid solutions, and which is why a lot of the times I don't see them as a victory. I just see them as like just kicking the can down the road. So yeah, that's what I want to say in closing, Matt. And just let everybody know where they can find you, when they can catch you, when you do your shows, and what you have coming up as of now.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to be on tomorrow. We do Tuesdays and Thursdays, The Homeless Left on Rumble. We got our new, we started a new YouTube channel because the last one got terminated. So Homeless Left is not on YouTube, but it is as THL Presents. So we're doing a little burner channel there, but we're primarily on Rumble Tuesdays and Thursdays at 12 noon Pacific. And we'll have, I think Craig Passa's coming back on with us this Thursday. We got some other guests we're lining up. But yeah, check us out tomorrow on Rumble, where we can have the conversations and not get the plug pulled out from under us. But we still have to deal with shadow banning. That's still a thing on X, on Rumble. But no, at least they don't pull the plug. Like YouTube literally pulls the plug out from under you and your channel gets disappeared. It's horrible. But hey, we got to keep fighting the censorship industrial complex, one battle at a time.
Yeah, everybody, make sure to follow Matt. And Matt, what was I going to say? God, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh well, never mind. When I remember, I'll ask you. But yeah, everybody follow Matt, and everybody follow him on X as well, right? You're also
Yes,
on
Matt
X and
Weinglass.
all those other.
Yes, you can do both Matt Weinglass and the Homeless Left on X as well. Yes.
Awesome. Sounds
Fee,
good.
thank you so much for having me on with you today. I always appreciate these conversations, these thoughtful introspections you always have with Truthwire and Craig and everyone that you bring on here, because we have to be able to step back from the two-party theater and look at things carefully and look at it, one thing at a time. And if Trump does something good, we give him credit. When he does something bad, we call that out. That's how we should do that with everything. People you like, people you don't like. Always give credit when they do something. Call them out when they do something bad. We have to be better at that. So,
balls and strikes, as Pasta says, right? Balls
Yep.
and strikes.
Yep, balls and strikes. Love it.
So, everybody, Jayme, do we have any super stuff? If we do, just let me know. If not, we'll take care of it next time. Otherwise, we'll see you on Friday. We'll have a show on Friday. And also for me, just follow on Substack. I'll have some things coming out and some great interviews as well that I'll publish. So thank you all for watching and tuning in. Make sure to always look a little bit deeper than what is being put out there. And we'll see you next time. Bye.